Hello, welcome to Cinema Savvy, and welcome back to another episode of Retro Reviews. Now, the film we are talking about today, as you can see from the title above, is 2015's Creed, and you might be wondering, why are we talking about a film that's only 5 years old on a show called Retro Reviews? Now, we've kind of okayed this with each other in that Retro Reviews can literally be any film that's come out before the present day that we're at now. So, 5 years ago, whatever, but we couldn't quite say goodbye to the Rocky franchise, not just yet. We had 2 more videos in us. And we actually had a debate. We've discussed this before, like, were we going to do the Creed films? Were we going to wait until Creed 3? But as we were watching, and I didn't think it took as long, like, I think we were about like 3-4 films maybe into the Rocky franchise where we knew that we wanted to talk about these. And actually, this is us returning to these reviews as well. We actually already on the channel have reviews for Creed 1 and Creed 2, but sometimes it's nice to come back after a few years' time, as the franchise changes or as our thoughts change. But even because we've just gone back through the franchise, it's nice to sort of cap off the Rocky franchise overall with these 2. But before we get into it proper, we'll just quickly go into the socials.
Absolutely, guys. So, as usual, what we always say, the best way to find out what we're going to do is to find us on our social medias. That is Facebook, Cinema Savvy, and Twitter at Cinema_Savvy. And, of course, we love getting in contact with everyone, replying to your comments, commenting with us on live streams if you are live and watching tonight. So, do comment below, especially with your thoughts on Creed. We've done 6 Rocky films. Creed's very different. You could argue there's a whole new generation. There's an audience that's developed with the Creed films. So it's really interesting to get people's perspective if they're new to Rocky via Creed or if they're big Rocky fans and how they felt about Creed. So comment along throughout the video and we will reply to those, as well as liking, sharing, and of course subscribing, because we are approaching some of our goals as we speak. And that being said, a quick tease for what is to come this week. Speaking of retro reviews, we've got our Tron review coming tomorrow. It's coming out Wednesday the 16th, followed by the Tron Legacy review this Thursday the 17th for its 10th anniversary to the day. So we've got a couple of extra reviews out, and we've got a big announcement to make on Thursday in regards to what other content is coming out on the channel. Because, yes, we are talking Creed. We are 7 films into the... could we call it the Rocky saga? They chuck the word legacy around a lot, don't they?
Yeah, I mean, at this point, and this is one of the biggest points that I'll talk about when we get into our conversation properly in a minute, that this is Adonis's story, and I'm very glad that it is. So I think that the main Rocky saga is over, but Rocky is still a very focal character in this film and a very important story, and is almost like the heart and soul of this of the next 2 films as well. So, the film following this as well. So he has his place, but I do think it's good to sort of differentiate between the Rocky saga and... we don't know how far Creed's going to go. Maybe it will be the Creed trilogy. Maybe that will be a Creed saga. Who knows? But we have a lot of things to talk about. We've already got Dave and we've got Carl in the comments. So as we go through, obviously join in the conversation. Let us know your opinions on the film as we go through it. So we always start off talking about our first time watching this film. Now, this came out, I think for us, it was after the US. I think this came out in the January of 2016, I want to say. Yeah. And there was a lot of actually like Oscar hype for this, mostly in terms of performances. I know that there was a lot of buzz, and we'll get into it when we talk about Stallone's character in this film, around Sylvester Stallone for Best Supporting Actor, and that kind of Oscar buzz. And I don't think he's actually was nominated for an Academy Award since the first Rocky film, 40 years previous to this. So right around then you had like all of the screeners coming out, and I think maybe some got leaked online, I'm not sure, but we got this finally in the January, and yeah, I mean, I was blown away by this film. I mean, even like just critical consensus, I hadn't seen any of the director's previous work at that point, Fruitvale Station, which came out in 2013, but we did eventually get to watch that, and we reviewed it on the channel as well, so you can check out some of our older videos for that review. But I always say, and I still stand by this to this day, although I have seen Cobra Kai now, so maybe that will give this a run for its money, this is the best soft reboot of a franchise I've ever seen, because it does everything that it needs to. It sets up a new character. It's more or less kind of beat for beat the same story as the original Rocky film, but it's advancing the characters. It's not just like hopelessly retreading over everything. It's got its own story to tell. It's pushing it forward with these characters. And even for like Rocky, it is an additional chapter in his story as well. So it's doing all of these things. It's honoring the old whilst also pushing forward with the new. And, even with Creed 2, fantastic sequel to this film. But this is the one that started it all. And I'll always say that this is the best soft reboot film I've ever seen. Cobra Kai is very good, though. So, yeah, those 2 are for me.
I'm holding my tongue because we're talking about Tron Legacy on Thursday. So,
Well, yeah,
that's my one. Everything you just
I
mentioned.
still haven't seen Tron Legacy
that's
just yet, so maybe.
I mean, Creed's probably on paper a better film. This is without a doubt a film that no one wanted. I think, obviously, sort of 2012, 2013 way. That's the kind of time that I'm developing to film. I start studying it at college and stuff, and I can't trace the origins of this. I can remember when Stallone on Instagram was announcing Drago for Creed 2 and all this crazy stuff, these Stallone full caps. Remember him sacking, what's his name from the Expendables via Twitter, Bruce Willis, and replacing him with Harrison Ford. But I don't remember anything about Creed. And then this is what I'm really annoyed at now. I cannot remember for life of me if I saw Fruitvale Station just before this or if I saw it just after this, because obviously we'll get into that story of how this film was made. But in terms of what you said about the soft reboot, absolutely, this has Stallone rightfully on the poster. This is a film starring Rocky, maybe Rocky's best performance, second best for me. But this is Creed. The opening scene of this is Creed, the first Rocky continuation where the opening scene isn't kind of the ending of the last one. Maybe Rocky Balboa, prove me wrong, sorry. But everything changed with this, and this put one of the probably now I wouldn't want to use the word powerful. This is probably one of the most interesting young directors into the limelight, and that is all down to Stallone for opening up and allowing him to carry on with this character projection. So then that's a good segue to get into it. Sorry, I'm talking about the first time I saw this. I'm the same with you. I remember it leaking online, and as usual, I think it came out in Thanksgiving in America. It was apparently, wait for this, the 40th anniversary of the fight between Rocky and Spider Rico. I'm assuming because that was probably filmed in 75. Anyway, that's the random thing. I remember seeing this in January, and it was the usual Oscar stuff. Oh my god, we have to wait until January time. All this Stallone talks everywhere. He's got his Golden Globe nomination already. All this Stallone Oscar hype is everywhere, and it's kind of like we're waiting as usual. And that's got worse over time with the Oscars. It's lovely that we're not getting a proper Oscar season. It seems that UK has films first for a change. Granted, all last cinemas are pretty much shut. So the first time I watched this, I was blown away. Now, I hadn't seen the Rocky films in a fair few years. So it was nice to go back to that character. However, watching it today, I've probably seen this a handful of times, probably 4 or 5. Watching this today on the back of doing our Rocky films, this hit differently. References, emotion, everything hit differently today. And I had an absolute blast once again to be able to see this. As I have had a great time with this franchise. Creed's the game changer. I think we'll get to it later, but if you're going to sit there and call the Rocky films, like Creed sits in that top 3. Shadow of a doubt. Sits in that top 3.
We'll probably do a ranking. After Creed 2, I think, just to sort of like to cap everything off. I do think that this is better than Rocky Balboa, not to take anything away from Balboa, because I do love where that film went. And it's, as we said, that it was the necessary sacrifice of Rocky 5. It needed to bring us back to basics. It needed us to get back on the streets of Philadelphia for it, so that you could have Rocky Balboa, so that you can have this one. And I do think stylistically, Balboa and this one are very much linked visually. Some of the stuff that they do with the boxing at the end, where it was more of that realistic HBO type stuff. But I do think this is more filmic. And I mentioned that about Rocky Balboa last time. I wasn't too keen on how the boxing was filmed and the stylistic choice throughout the majority of that film, whereas I think this one definitely nailed it better. And I think by the time we get to Creed 2, it was an absolute home run for the boxing. So as far as I know, the backstory for this thing, I think it was just an idea that Ryan Coogler had, wasn't it? And he just happened to pitch it to Stallone, and the rest, they say, is history. I'm trying to think back to what you said, where you don't really remember much hype surrounding this film or any build up to it.
Sorry.
I was
going to talk the background. So the story I remember reading was, this is again after Creed came out. Ryan Coogler, this young director, obviously we know that not Apollo Creed, sorry. Stallone's retired the character of Rocky with Rocky Balboa. It's the farewell chapter. It's all done. And this kid fresh out of uni approaches him, says, "Hi, I want to make this film called Creed. It's going to be basically if Apollo Creed had a son, and it's going to be about Rocky mentoring him into a fight." He pitched Creed to Stallone pre-Fruitvale Station. Stallone declined it. Now, there's probably way more detail than what I'm saying, but Stallone said, "No, I've retired this character. I'm not going to do this. Sounds a bit like Rocky. I'm retiring." And And then Fruitvale Station came out, which obviously starred Michael B. Jordan, Ryan Coogler's directorial debut, very powerful film we spoke about earlier this year. And after that film came out, I don't know if he approached him again and pitched it or if Stallone directly contacted him, but after Fruitvale Station, Stallone trusted him with the character to get this done. So obviously Coogler, I think, wrote it. However, Stallone was basically had it in that he were to write all the dialogue that Rocky says in it. Everything else was on Ryan Coogler, but anything that involved Rocky was Stallone, which I really like because I did not know that until today. And I think that's a massive thing because we've said it before in these videos that Rocky's very autobiographical to Stallone. It seems to me it's where he's at in his life in this state, whether it's the words, the stories, his mythology. He's got a different perspective each film. And Creed certainly brings that home. And I couldn't have imagined anyone else taking on this character other than Stallone. So I'm happy that while he was okay to sort of give up the rest of the film, that he stayed attached to those Rocky stuff. And I think that's why this film works. I think if Rocky was suddenly different, it would have stuck out like a sore thumb, like what's happened here. But Coogler had the trust of him. And then, what comes after Creed? Black Panther, one of the biggest films in history, box office wise, 4 Oscars, everything. This has put him on a trajectory into what he's become now. And we know he's doing Black Panther 2, but obviously we'll talk about more on Creed 2 that he didn't come back for that. But Creed, I mean, Stallone, he's given someone a shot. And it's kind of that Rocky thing, isn't it? That I'm going to give you a shot. Stallone could have just said, you know what? You can write the script and I'll direct it. But no, he gave him complete trust. It was this kid's idea and he commissioned that. And I've got nothing but further respect for Stallone. And after reading all that after this release, it's been in my memory for a long time. And I think that's when, not to get into a side piece of like politics, that they speak a lot about black directors not getting chances, not getting those budgets. This is one of the most powerful guys in Hollywood. Sylvester Stallone saying, you know what, you can take this character, take this world, take this legacy, take essentially what I've built over the last 40 years, and it's yours to pitch what you want. And it's about the opportunity. And the whole point of Creed is that reflection. It's Creed's given a shot. Granted, that's the Rocky story, but there's a very, very similar trajectory there. And I know that's kind of waffling at this point, but I think that's really important before you get into the film, that backstory, because Stallone could have sat on an ego and said, I'll do Creed because this kid pitched it. I'm going to take his idea. But to me, whenever you see the interviews of Stallone, he's like a really like nice granddad at this point in time, that he's just this really likable guy. He's had a tough life outside of film as well. And it does make you think, especially with his character. And I think this was the perfect way for him to, if you're going to bring him out of retirement, let it be for something phenomenal. And it was.
Yeah, and I'm guessing Stallone probably saw something in Ryan Coogler, who probably saw that spark, and that this isn't just like any average Joe off the street who's just come like, hey, I've got an idea for like another Rocky film. Like this is a story, this is a message that someone wanted to put across. He had a vision for it, and I mean, it just shows in the final product itself. Like, not only is the story itself good and the original stuff that it's setting up and bringing in these new characters and this new legacy, because it is a legacy that it's establishing. It's the reverence that it has for like the previous franchise, and there's loads of callbacks, mostly towards the Rocky, like the earlier Rocky films up until Rocky 4, because obviously that's a huge part of it, and we'll probably talk about this more when we get into Creed 2. But the fact that it can go back to some of those more comedic Rocky films, the more cartoony ones, and just completely change the way that you view those films, especially when you know that you're getting towards this one. And I think it's probably when we got to like Rocky 3 and Rocky 4 where we knew that we wanted to go into these ones as well. But yeah, it's that tone. And I think with Ryan Coogler now, I mean, I've said I've never been a big fan of the Black Panther film itself, like not taking any away of the impact that it had, but just as a Marvel film, it didn't really do it for me. But I will say, even compared to Creed 2, and this, I might be saying a different story next time when we talk about Creed 2, but in my mind as of right now, and watching this again, I do think you could notice Ryan Coogler's absence from the second film. Not to take anything away from Creed 2, because I love Creed 2. I think it's a perfect sequel. I think it's a solid sequel. And Stephen Caple Jr. did a fantastic job of directing that and making it seem like this. But I don't know whether it was particularly the story of this or the script of this, or this one had more emotion in a certain way. It could be any one of those elements, but I do think from a director standpoint, even certain shots in this, like the opening shot where you follow him almost like in a one shot from the changing room straight into the ring, and the certain directorial choices and the way that it's shot and the way the camera moves which I think is lost a little bit in Creed 2, and I'm guessing that was probably more from Coogler's input with this one.
Yeah, and I think it's exactly what you said, because I've only seen Creed 2 once. I'm really excited to actually see it again. But when they said, oh, Coogler's not coming back, it was that worry that, oh, okay, he's just done this phenomenal Creed film and he can do whatever he wants in Creed 2. And we kind of knew that Drago would come. I guess we'll talk about it next week. It's like inevitability. But it's exactly it's the shooting, the direction. I feel the script's tighter in this. I think, did Stallone write the script for the second one? I can't remember fully, but the script feels tighter.
He was co-writer on it for Creed 2. Yeah.
And you can feel his absence, and I enjoy it. But in this one, the direction, I mean, even we get, obviously, 2 big fights. Well, you get kind of 3, but obviously we get that tracking shot, which we'll talk about later. But that's stuff we haven't seen in these films. And it goes to that, this is telling the story of the drama, but it's doing it in a way we've not seen it done before. It feels new to these films. And it's the whole new generation, new characters. Let's bring in some new ideas, and he fits so well into that. And it'd be the same with Black Panther. If he didn't direct Black Panther 2, don't get me wrong, they could get the best director on the planet to do it straight away after. You would still feel his absence regardless, because it's not the same guy that created that put everything into that. I'm not taking that away from what Black Panther 2 is going to be, but it is that this is his idea, and to me, he's 3 for 3 on his films. He seems like a very talented director, very, very highly regarded within Marvel, obviously by Stallone. And I think he is the sole reason this film works. And jumping in with Ryan Coogler, who has been in all of his films, to come here with him, Michael B. Jordan as well. If you're going to talk about Apollo Creed, not just within the world, one of the most iconic, in their world, the greatest boxers of all time. In our life, that's Apollo Creed. That's the villain from Rocky 1 and 2. That's the guy that got killed by Drago. That's Carl Weathers, who can take on that legacy. And you've got Michael B. Jordan. Let's go back to 2015. What's he been in? Fantastic, I think, came out the summer after or the summer before. Mm-hmm. Obviously, he had been in The Wire, which was when he was younger. I'd seen him in Chronicle, which is the one which really put him on the map. Obviously, Fruitvale Station, massive film, but Chronicle was just before them. He's bringing him back. He's putting him in a lead role. Now, not to sound weird, I couldn't have seen Michael B. Jordan as a boxer. He's never looked like he's had that ripped physique. Maybe that's because of the clothes he wears or how he's been in other films. But when you see him in this film preparing for this fight, it's not to sort of harp on the older Rocky films. With them, it's like that's like the action hero Stallone, Lundgren, and they are all specimens. But the fighters in these ones, obviously, they use real fighters throughout as well. That feels natural. That's like, oh my god, he is built like that is a fighter, and it feels like he's a fighter, not a test tube experiment that's been chucked in a ring. Not to slate the other films, because I adore that about all of them. I love the whole, we kind of say comic book sort of things like Mr. T's the villain, Drago's the villain, Creed's the villain. Michael B. Jordan just fits in this so well, and obviously we'll get to his villain later. But I think Coogler needs Michael B. Jordan. Michael B. Jordan needs Coogler. There's no coincidence there. It's more Michael B. Jordan. His best performance will be with Ryan Coogler. His best performance has been with Ryan Coogler. Mm-hmm. So I think he's a tremendous part of this. And that's everything. You want to say the word expectation? There probably wasn't any, because Carl mentioned it earlier in the comments that he was skeptical on release. Yeah. And I remember being the same. Like, again, another Rocky film. And back in then, when this was, it was probably, but he's already done Rocky 5, but he's already done Balboa. And Balboa is not that long ago. That's, what, a 9-year gap?
On paper, it screams cash grab, doesn't it? Especially when you've got like a beloved franchise that came back so strong with Balboa and tied the bow on it, put the full stop after it. That's it. To go, oh, we're going to do a spin-off about Apollo Creed's son, and it's going to be like Rocky all over again. Like, even to me, if I read that, I'd be like, oh, this is where it all ends. This is where it's going to go bad. But they proved everyone, from the writing, the directing, the acting, especially, just everything came together with this, and it's made it its own. To the point where now I don't know if I could do a Creed saga. I don't know if Creed's a type of character that has the legs to go for a Creed 4, 5, Adonis Creed or whatever for the 6th one. Like, I don't see it going that far, and I do think you need Rocky to tether it. He's almost like the anchor of the franchise. It's not about him, but he is sort of like the emotional core to it still. Although Adonis is a great character, and they really develop his character in this. And also, going back to Michael B. Jordan, I can't imagine anyone else in the role for this. Like, you could say Apollo Creed's son, and you'd want someone who's just as brash as he was, and almost like a Clubber Lang kind of character, that gift of the gab kind of thing. And he really isn't that kind of character, but that makes sense because he's not trying to be like his dad. If anything, he's trying to break away. He's trying to create his own identity, his own image. And it's only by the end of the film and the the journey that he goes on where he can accept his heritage and where he came from, embrace that, and also make a name for himself with that name too. So it all comes together. I think it's beautifully written. But yeah, Michael B. Jordan in this, even the name Adonis Creed. Like if Apollo Creed's going to have a son, you best believe he's going to call that son Adonis. And my God, he is. And they showcase that right from the opening scene. This guy is just built to physical perfection in this film. God knows what his training regimen was like, especially diet as well. But absolutely hats off to him for getting in this peak physical condition for it. Because he's an absolute. He's chiseled like a Greek statue in this. It's amazing.
Yeah, and I think that's where the core of it comes down to. You mentioned how Rocky's the sort of the emotional anchor to this film. To me, all of Adonis's best scenes involve Rocky. Now, I can't tell you the same about Rocky 2. It's been a while since I've seen it, but they need each other. I don't think you can have Rocky in a solo world. We'll speak about next time. He spoke about, oh my God, there's a Rocky 7 idea in Mexico. This film starts in Mexico. You said Rambo goes to Mexico. There's something happening there. But yeah, he's built like a brick. And again, with them bringing this, I hate the word realism because this is a drama, but because the Rocky films went so out of that realism, this is bringing it back in. I know the sort of previous one did do that, but when you get Tony Bellew, who is an established champion real life boxer, in this, it would make a mockery if you just had this sort of A-lister just there. Sort of like, I'm a good actor. It'd be like, having a comedy. It's like Chris Rock's a boxer and you put Chris Rock in a ring with a real boxer. It wouldn't work. You'd need an actor to go against. Now, Lundgren's different because they're them sort of 80s action heroes and they work with each other. The fact you've got these big names clashing on screen, that's like actors' egos, physicality, but a real boxer in this, you say villain role. He's not much of a villain. We'll get to that. But for what they're trying to do with this film, Michael B. Jordan needed to be grounded, and he was, and it looked real. It felt real. And when he is fighting, it feels like they're real punches. Bar the eye thing at the end, everything about it feels completely natural.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think it needed to go there as well. Even just like the surrounding characters as well to Adonis. You've got Bianca, who's introduced in this as well as the love interest. And she kind of has, that more or less comes to a head in Creed 2, doesn't it, with the whole hearing difficulties she has. But the fact that he needs these people around him, you have his mom as well, played by a different actress to who she was in the first couple of Rocky films, but just bringing in all these elements that just add to the character, even where we start it off where he is the illegitimate son or out of wedlock for Apollo Creed, and that makes you go back and look at Apollo Creed in those first few. You see him as this family man and like, oh, he must have been unfaithful at some point. So it brings in all these things into his character, and yeah, I just think he's a fantastic character. Maybe not as, I don't know, because maybe I'm sure to like a new crowd, maybe people identify with him more, but I don't think he quite has. He's very different to Rocky as a main character, and he is still striving for that same goal. He wants to make something of himself like Rocky wanted to in that first film and to earn that self-respect for himself. But he's a very different character and he needs to be, but it's right. It's that mentor-student relationship. And if you can get that right in a film, you can, some of the most emotional moments in films, or especially like major characters, are that kind of dynamic. And I think the two work off each other beautifully. Even into Rocky in this now, this was hard-hitting stuff when I watched this. Even for us, especially, to any audience member, I suppose, going to see this film, but especially if you followed them as we have over the last few weeks, getting to this one.
Yeah.
I can't remember who he was up against in terms of the category, in terms of supporting actor, but I think he was robbed. This is without a doubt some of the best, most emotional acting I've ever seen Stallone do. There's a scene in this, and I think that Carl's mentioned one earlier. If I just scroll up real quick, he says the scene where Rocky just sits and talks and reads the paper at Adrian's grave always gets me. We do get a lot more moments like that, and of course Paulie has passed away in between films. The actor hasn't, but I think that the character kind of ran his course a little bit with Balboa. And is that what we said with Adrian as well, wasn't it? Where what can you really do with Adrian's character? And there is poignancy in them having died off screen, and the heartache and the emotion that Rocky carries with him. And I mean, at this point, he has no one. He says that his son's moved away, his wife's gone, his best friend's gone, his brother-in-law. So he has no one. And when he goes through these heartaches, one of my favorite scene in this film is where Rocky gets. It sounds horrible. My favorite scene is where he gets diagnosed with lymphoma, but it's where he goes for treatment, and she's talking about treatment options, and he just goes, "Yeah, my wife tried that." And his voice is cracking, and it's like, oh, Stallone, don't cry. You're going to make me cry. Don't cry. He's perfect in this, and you can tell that he's absolutely putting his heart and soul into this performance. I think this is a better performance than Rocky Balboa. I think there's just more gravitas to it, and I think you would have that naturally anyway when you're dealing with a character who has a terminal illness, who could potentially die in this film. Which is also a thing I'm going to bring up in Creed 2, that they kind of just drop that, which I thought was a weird choice, but I kind of understand it for that film. But I think this is easily one of Stallone's best performances. I think probably Rocky 1's his best still, but this, I think, like you, this would be his very close second.
I remember the first trailer. Sorry, not first trailer. Maybe it was the second one. It was like, oh my god, like, why have they just put this in the trailer? This is really sad. And everyone goes into this film with an expectation and an ending to a character arc. It hits hard. The first time I saw this, that was quite sad to watch stuff like this. Obviously, just sort of life and stuff. But when you've been watching all these films in a row, and even going back to the graveyard scene, when we spoke last week, the bit of the grave got me, especially when his son's there, and it's the bottle of alcohol, it's the rose, it's when he says Paulie, and you think, oh, is Paulie there? But no, you realise that the camera's not showed the grave scene, which hits differently, it hits harder, and it is that reading the newspapers himself, talking with them, having that discussion. It's heartbreaking to see, because
it's the bottle of whiskey, isn't it, on Paulie's grave as well.
And the saddest thing is that we know as the audience via a trailer that he's just about to get cancer in this one too. And that scene you mentioned when he talks about Adrian hits hard. It's the reaction of the actress who's playing the nurse when he just sort of gets up, like, thank you, like, so we got to do this. And he's like, and that's when it hits differently. It is all that, and we get the montage later on, and obviously I'm assuming he's wearing a wig or he's got prosthetics on to make him look like he's got less hair and stuff. And it's that journey that this character goes on in the film with Adonis. And I mentioned obviously earlier that some of the best scenes are with each other. The scene when Michael B. Jordan discovers that he's ill, I know it's the sort of following scene, that the nasty comment by Rocky, and then it's Rocky's like, like, he's talking to himself after, like, he's messed up, like he feels really guilty and stuff, and Adonis goes on his rampage. And you mentioned with Adonis, he doesn't feel like Rocky would, and I think that's, I don't mean that Edge says better, not at all, but the difference of Adonis is that he's not clean cut. He did grow up in the juvenile halls. He has had fights. He's a street fighter. He's doing fights in this. It's not the stuff Rocky ever did or would do. And I think that brings that character, because he's pissed off to this point where he's obviously so upset by what Rocky said to him and that Rocky's avoiding the treatment, that he does go and batter a load of people in the club. And I loved that kind of stuff because it enhanced not just Michael Jordan's performance, but Stallone's with it. And this is probably... It lost to Bridge of Spies, Mark Rylance, who is phenomenal. I'm going to sit here on a limb. I'm going to sit here on a limb. The Oscars have a proud history of giving people awards on their legacies, on their careers and everything, which is why to this day, as much as I love Mark Rylance and he is phenomenal in Bridge of Spies, that was Stallone's night. It should have been Stallone's night. I mean,
do you remember the clip as well that they played during all the clips of the films? They always usually play like the best or most impressive moment from the film or the most emotional. And clearly, if you're going to, do a clip of Stallone from this film, you do that bit where he's talking about the treatment with the nurse. And you get, I think the camera focuses on him as well. You don't even see the nurse until it just lingers on him, doesn't it? That's the clip you show. And the clip they showed, if I remember rightly on the night, it was just some random scene where he's training Adonis. Not a bad scene, but certainly not the clip that you show when you're going up for, best supporting actor for it.
And that's the thing. That whole award ceremony, even though you wanted to win, you could tell it just meant more to him winning that he was there, that they had recognised him. And I think that's what gets me with it, is that, it wasn't that happy ending, but you know what? He would have took that. I don't think anyone would have expected that. And it's that whole, he began, that his first Oscar nomination, he said, was Rocky. And it didn't end because he's in Creed 2, but it's that, what's his second nomination? It's Rocky, it's Creed, sorry, almost, 40 years later. So He's incredible in this, and as you mentioned, the arc we can discuss in Creed 2, because I don't like what they did, especially going back to it today. I think it's the first time I've seen Creed since Creed 2. It's like, oh, they dropped off more than I thought they did between the two releases, and he's on this trajectory path. And to sound horrible, he needs that personal stuff to be able to, because that brings out the best of Stallone. But with Rocky as a character, everything about him is so perfectly triggered. The fact that he's refusing to teach all the other kids. He doesn't want to get involved with anyone, but there's one kid that comes through. Now, granted, a lot of it is down to Creed. There's a certain amount of guilt, which I know he discusses a lot more in Creed 2, but there's so much going on, not metaphorically, because that makes it sound way too deep than it is, but the moment they connect, and even terms like uncle, and what he does perfectly, rather than just going back to Rocky, he captures everything that Rocky would be like, when he's like, oh, it's in the cloud, and he's like looking up, and it's because Rocky in 76 isn't with it there fully, so he wouldn't suddenly be a wise sort of granddad. He's still got to have those Rocky things, and he has all of that, and he's just perfect. Just from the moment he comes out the door with his crate, from bringing it back, it wasn't this big reveal. As much as we love the Bail Organa walk into the light, this didn't need that. This was just him just popping up out of the cellar in his shop. The fact that Ryan Coogler kept stuff like the Adrian's restaurant, which gets a big scene in the second film. I love all those kind of things about it. It's this nice continuation, and it's that character arc of what's going to be the difference to pull Rocky out of what he's chosen to avoid for so long. And I think, again, it's just genius that, and the fact the whole Apollo Creed stuff is jumping right to the end, the bit that gets me all of it, Michael Jordan, it's the whole purpose of this is when he says, I'm not a mistake. That hit on a level. That was not expected. Obviously he knows he is, but you don't look at it in that limelight until he sees it himself. It's not about going the distance like what Rocky was in the first film. Mm-hmm. It's not about being the father's legacy. It's just about something else, and his character arc is just extraordinary in this. And the characters they sort of share it with. I think that's a really good segue into. Have we got anything else to talk about Rocky as well?
I was going to talk about the link between the two of them, but you've hit on most of it there as well. I will say, going back to the restaurant thing, we never know what happens to Little Marie. It's one of the biggest mysteries of this entire franchise. There's no mention of her or her son Steps or. Yeah. Well, Punchy the dog looked about a year away from death anyway, didn't he? Bless him in Rocky Balboa. But I always wondered. But then again, this is 9 years after, and it's interesting that you mentioned that the cloud stuff with Rocky and being out of touch with the world, because we saw that in Rocky Balboa, and I keep forgetting because the two look so visually similar. It is like a 9-year jump or almost a 10-year jump between that film and this one. And so, a lot can happen in 10 years, especially when you're older generation as well. You do sort of lose the plot with things and don't stay up to date with things like Rocky does in this film. But the link between Rocky and Adonis in this is brilliant because, you're right. You have Rocky who's dealing with that guilt from 4. And even when I watched 4 when we did the review a couple of weeks ago, you're watching well, why didn't Rocky just throw in the towel? He could have ended all this much sooner. But then, Rocky 4 charges on and he's got to fight Ivan Drago. And before you know it, we're into Rocky 5 and Balboa. And we haven't got time to go back to that stuff. And this film allows us to go back to that moment. And he says that, I didn't call your mom. I can't bring myself to call your mom or stay in touch with her after what happened, racked with guilt. So you have Rocky dealing with that. You also have the sense that he's lost everyone and he doesn't really have anything to fight for. He proved what he needed to prove with Rocky Balboa. And after he's done that, after the beast is out of him, what does he do? He's kind of reverts back to how he was at the beginning of Rocky Balboa, where he was sort of just cast adrift in this world that's passed him by. And then you have Adonis who wants to, prove something to himself. He has this antagonistic relationship between the memory of his dad. He wants to distance himself away from that. But when the two come together with both of these ideals, the two help each other out of it. And I think the scene that best exemplifies that is where, and you mentioned there as well, that the very next scene is where Adonis finds those leaflets in Rocky's coat pocket. And I'm glad they didn't drag that out because that could be that second act thing where it goes on for about half hour or something. I'm glad they nipped that in the bud straight away from the next scene. In that he says, if I'm fighting, you're fighting. So Adonis is physically training for a fight, and Rocky's arguably fighting the toughest thing he's ever had to fight in his life, even tougher than Super Russians or Mr. T. It's even down to the montage. It's not just a physical training montage. We do get that, and we have the amazing bit at the end. We'll talk about the music. It's probably one of my favorite training montages out of the entire franchise. but you have Adonis training for that, and you have Rocky also in his own personal fight and taking that treatment, and Adonis sitting beside him and helping him with that. And the two are just helping each other through it. And that to me is just the emotional core of this film and why the two work so great with each other.
Yeah, and it's the dynamic between them. I think it can't work if you have the wrong actor as Creed. This film doesn't work. It relies on not just his individually physicality, performance-wise, not how he is with Tessa Thompson. It's got to be how he is with Rocky and how he is by himself. Can he convey everything he's saying? And he nails that perfectly. And, jumping far ahead, the fact that now they're talking about Michael B. Jordan directing Creed 3, kind of, if you want to talk about legacies and passing of the torches, when you've got Stallone that goes on to direct so many Rocky films after, is that kind of, what? Many other franchises, I'd be really concerned if an actor wanted to direct a feature film. But Rocky's like that, what? Just go with it because it's been done. But it's everything. It's fighting this battles together. And the fact that we don't have Rocky scuffling, fighting in the ring, we know we can't at age, but it'd be easy for them to do a scene, to do something related to that, whether it be some people in the street, whether it be a bar or anything. The fact that he's so far from that, not a pacifist as such, but it's all about his wisdom now. He doesn't even want to train at the boxers. He won't even help. He's got that kid that looks like the Man City goalkeeper, the guy from Dark Knight. If you don't know that already. Yeah. I don't know if he owns Mixed Gym or if he's technically employed by Stone. I don't know. I'm assuming he probably sold it off screen. But even those things where it's like, what, just please don't leak this kind of stuff to the papers. It's so personal to Rocky, all of it. But I think that's what makes it. And you mentioned the Adonis Creed training scene when it just cuts up to the window of like a smiling Stallone, because I loved I don't like the Rocky 2 training montage. The whole, let's have the whole estate run around me. But this one was perfect. It's very obviously modernized, very urban, but it's cool. Like, it's like, on paper, like, let's have motorbikes like be doing tricks around Adonis Creed training. I'd be like, what? But when you watch it, you're not pumped like normal. Like, the music's a bit different. It's Ludwig Göransson paying homage, I guess, to the soundtrack. We get that in a couple of scenes where they're doing something similar, but that's like, what? It wouldn't work for Creed to have the exact same carbon copy montage as Rocky always had. I'm glad he doesn't run up the steps. We get that beautiful scene at the end. Mm-hmm. But everything they did for that was perfect. Even the weird, let's just have them all circle around him. It's just the Stallone smiling down upon him from the window is incredible.
That's the scene that, to me, nails why this is the best soft reboot that I've ever seen, because in that scene, it is honoring that what has come before. It's not like these soft reboots where it dismisses the old or flips a middle finger to it or does whatever to it. It honors it. It knows where its roots are. And, the focus is still on Adonis, absolutely, training for it. And you get some beautiful camera angles. The slow motion shot with the camera tracking back and him running towards the camera. You've got the quad bike sort of doing these tricks. It's beautiful to look at. The music as well. I'll get onto that in a second. But that moment, you could have ended that on like a triumphant Adonis shot where he's like jumping and punching the air, freeze frame, cut to the fight. The fact that he points to Rocky and he says like, "This is all for you. This is you." That says it all to me. And that's why I think this film nails that, because it knows what it needs to be. It needs to be its own thing, but it also needs to honor what's come before. And I think that just sums it up there. But the music in this part, I mean, Ludwig Göransson, this was the first film I think where I became aware of the name. And what he does well, and obviously we've seen him now do so many scores to Tenet and Mandalorian. He's doing a fantastic job. And interestingly, with Mandalorian, when we started watching that in season 1, me and you both said, well, it sounds like the Rocky music. And then we did some backtracking like, oh, he did the music to this, so maybe that makes sense. I think now I've got past that and Mandalorian's kind of established its own sound for me, but certainly that first time I listened to it, and there are some similarities there with the main theme. But it's beautiful because, again, it's almost like what I just said. It has a similar sound to what we know from Rocky, even the Adonis theme, but it is a brand new theme for Adonis, but it doesn't feel completely out of place or removed or too tonally jarring from what it fits beautifully into what Bill Conti wrote in the original ones, but it also establishes its own sound to the point now where when you get to Creed 2, and I'm so thankful they continued using the same themes, because if they'd completely ditched all the themes that Ludwig did for this film, I think you would have lost that musical identity. We always talk about it with the Marvel films, how from film to film they would use different composers, and the leitmotifs, the main themes for a lot of those characters would get lost because of that. Whereas with this, when that Adonis theme plays, that's almost just as good to me as Gonna Fly Now or something like that. It has that same effect. It's that victorious fanfare to it. There's loads of different versions throughout it. I think it's an incredible score. And you do get some of like the familiar music as well from the old coming in towards the end as well.
Yeah, this is completely random timing. He's done an interview with GQ today, which I have on my computer screen right now that I was reading before we were on this stream. So Tenet's out on Blu-ray, so they're doing more marketing stuff. And there's a fantastic thing where the guy asked him a question essentially saying, you've took on the Nolan films who have Hans Zimmer. You've also done Star Wars, which has John Williams. How is it, going into these worlds? And his reply is also Creed. With those iconic legacies, the iconic soundtracks. And actually what he spoke about was that his word for word, on all these projects, I felt very much the pressure's off from the beginning. Because they're saying, I want you to write something for this franchise, but I actually want you to think about it. How do I keep what's old in there? How do I go about doing that whilst having my own mind space from the very beginning to do something completely different from that world? Mm-hmm. Go to Mandalorian, go to Tenet, Black Panther's its own thing. He's won an Oscar for that. Again, this is someone that we talk about the Ryan Coogler effect. They met at university. They lived together. They were dormed. They met living together at uni, essentially in halls. And they just hit it off on the grounds. He's from Sweden. He moved to America to study music. And he suddenly was doing projects at university for Ryan Coogler. So when it came to Fruitvale Station, he brought him into Creed, brought him into Black Panther. Obviously, then off the back of this, to me, he's one of the most exciting composers working right now. It is that he feels different. His mythology, if anyone's not seen it, there's the Disney Plus Gallery series. There's an episode just on the music. His process is so different to anyone else, and that's what the Rocky films need. I don't think you could have that classic trumpet sound, the trumpet run, everything gonna fly now. But what they do, they put it a little bit of spice in there, and they put bits of it in here and there. Again, think of Tenet, really random comparison, but when they've got the scene with the trucks, and you've got the bits of the Travis Scott voice, they kind of have that in the Gonna Fly Now with this weird sort of chorusy, echoey thing, and it feels like this is something new happening in a world we're familiar with, and it's the same. And I'm not going to say the music's phenomenal. I think it's a fantastic score for the Rocky films. I think it carries on the legacy. I love the return of when it's sort of near the end of the fight, they bring in the classic Rocky bit in the build-up. Because he's not sitting here saying, I need to get this, and this, and this ticked off. But he edges in with a couple of things here and there. And I think that's what benefits this film, because the last thing you want is this new world, new director, new take, new everything, and have a carbon copy soundtrack to what you had before. Even Giacchino with Rogue One switched up a couple of things because he wanted to put his own take on it. And I've got nothing but respect for that. And the music with that, I guess, even Ludwig Göransson, a big revelation to me today, he cameos in the film as well. He has 2 cameos.
Yeah, you found this out today, yeah.
So there's the first scene of Bianca performing at the club, and he's there in the back, and I was like, oh my God, is that Ludwig Göransson, like in a cameo? And back then, I didn't know who he was. I didn't know what he looked like. Now I very much do. And then again, when they have the hallway fight, not Tenet, the Creed hallway fight, you can see him in the dressing room that Bianca's in as well. So he's part of her band. So I'm excited to see if he's got that in Creed 2 as well. But, again, it's going forwards. Here we are in 2020, and we're looking at the creative this composer's achieved in 5 years. He's at EGOT, like the most prestigious musical thing, and he's a Tony Award away from having it. And I think he's in his early 30s.
I was going to say, he'll be one of the greats. He'll go down as one of the greats in his career, definitely. Because he's just so experimental with stuff. You talked about his process, and granted, I haven't watched that, but from hearing what you told me about and how he conducts himself in interviews, he sounds a very unique guy. I will say that. But you kind of have to, if you're dabbling in that kind of music and you're that creative all the time, then you kind of have to be. But now I know what he looks like. I will be looking out for him in Creed 2 when I come to rewatch that for next week. I'm trying to think if there's anything else. So I guess I can talk a little bit about Ricky Conlan in this film. We've already touched on him a little bit, but this will take us into the final boxing fight. Again, kind of like Balboa, this is probably the weakest side of it for me, is that more antagonistic side. And it never kind of strays into that villain territory. Now, when we get to Creed 2, that is going back to that villain territory, and I kind of like that. But for this, he's serviceable for it. There's this weird backstory where he's going to prison soon, and he's got one fight left in him, and he wants to honor this title or something like that. I can't even remember what it is. He's just kind of the weak link in this film. Now, the focus of the film is where it needs to be, and this is kind of what I said with Balboa as well, that although I didn't like Mason the Lion Dixon, I didn't think he was an interesting character in any way, shape, or form, the focus of that film is on Rocky and him wanting to do, to get this out of his system and to sort of be that fitting farewell. And that's where the focus of Balboa is, and it works because of this. And that's exactly what this film is. It's setting up Adonis, all this stuff going on with Rocky that I don't really care about any of that stuff with Ricky Conlan. It just seems like an opponent he needs to fight. So I don't really have a problem with it, but if I was going to try and find some negatives, I would say that the guy doesn't really have much personality. I don't care about his character in any way, really. But then we get to the boxing fight now. I think they nail it more in Creed 2, but I do like the style of this. It's sticking very much with that HBO style fighting that they did in Rocky Balboa, but it makes it a little bit filmic in this one. And maybe that's down to the soundtrack or down to the direction. I'm not sure. But I get more invested in this fight than I do in the one in Rocky Balboa. That being said, there are a couple of stylistic choices, not just specifically within this fight, but throughout the film, which I don't like and felt a bit out of place. The first one is where he gets introduced to a new fighter and it will freeze frame.
Yes.
And it's almost like
Tarantino.
Yeah, exactly. Like all these fighting stats. It feels like something that you'd get in like as you said, Tarantino or Suicide Squad. Like these are all of their attributes and how many wins by knockout they've had. And it just felt so random and kind of pointless as well, because I think you get it in dialogue anyway. And it's just all these side characters that maybe appear for one scene and then disappear out the film. So it's like, why should I care about that? That's the first one. And then the other is watching it again. I didn't realize how much awful green screen is in the ending of this fight.
Goodison Park.
Yeah. It looks so off. And I don't remember it looking that. I don't even think I clocked onto that when I saw it in 2015. But watching it again, there are some very questionable angles in this, and the green screen just does not fit at all.
I don't know. I'm going to do Ricky Conlan, then I'm going to do the green screen because I remember everything about that being filmed. It's incredible. So obviously we're from the Midlands in the UK, guys. If there are any Scouse people at home, I'm apologies if you don't know what a Scouse person is. Just Google the phrase "Scouse not English" and just listen to them. When you bring on Tony Bellew, and again, I've said this before, I'm not a boxing know-it-all. I don't watch much of it. I watch the odd big pay-per-view on Reddit and stuff like that. I don't sit here sub to it all. Even the Joshua fight, I text Chris the weekend saying, "Oh my god, I just miss it when like a fight starts and Rocky gets headshot like 10 times." And in this one, it's like, okay, so they're going for this grounded, realistic approach, and you're going to bring in a real-life champion, Tony Bellew, who became the champion after this film came out as well. I don't even think he used it projector in career. It was like, who can we get in this film? And this is why it's so random. He's a massive Everton fan of a football club based in Liverpool. Now, the story is, don't know if they scouted him or if he was always interested in the idea. They wanted to do this at Anfield, which is the home of Liverpool Football Club, Everton's rivals, and Tony Bellew's from Liverpool. He's a massive Everton fan because most Scousers do support Everton because they're not glory sports. And he basically said, "I'm not going to be in your film if you're going to make me be a Liverpool fan, wear a Liverpool top, do anything at Anfield." He basically said, "I'm not doing it." So Stallone comes in with the crew. Okay, we're going to film at Goodison Park, which is the Everton Stadium. We're going to let you be in your Everton badges because he, in real life, apparently he used to walk out to the music they play at the Everton ground as well. So he's like an Everton legend. And his final fight in real life was actually at Goodison Park, which was a couple of years after this film, which is quite jarring as well. That being said, you're right. He's getting put in prison for selling guns or having guns, and it's like, we know you're a Scouser, mate, but even for like English prison stuff, that's a bit extreme. I mean, it's so, maybe in some countries, I'm not going to point names like USA, we don't really have gun problems here, let alone a champion. And I know this is fictional, but when you're bringing in that real life champion to a fictional thing, and they're putting this weird story in, like, oh, he got in a massive fight at the way, and I get stuff like that. And he never felt like a villain. It's exactly what he said. It's like the Rocky Balboa one. By trying to make it a bit more grounded, by being less cartoonish, you lose the reality. You have it. I mean, we love Apollo Creed in the first one, but he's not really. You get the way in, you get him talking stuff throughout, but he's in all honesty, he's quite likable because he's fun to have on screen. He's great on screen, but ultimately he picks Rocky. He's put him in that position to do it. Whereas Tony Bellew isn't picking for money. It's again the corporate, his trainer's doing it because his trainer needs the money. What's going to bring in money? It's going to be Creed Jr. So this one, I think, because the journey is so central on Adonis, I don't mind having a weaker villain. But what it means is for the follow-up film, now we've had this person set up, what do we want to go into? And we can get into that in a week, because if you'd have put Drago in the first one, would never have worked. Would have been cheap, would have been awful. And this wasn't a franchise bait, because modern day cinema, if they planned a Creed trilogy, there'd have been like a credit scene of the opening scene of Creed 2, which is like Dolph Lundgren, like just his face watching on a TV or something. But the CGI, so as they decided to film this at Goodison Park, they needed crowd noise, people in the seats. You're not going to fill a 40,000 seat stadium. That's a lot of money you'd be paying extras to sit on their ass doing nothing. So they basically, I remember this clearly because my lecturer at the time was a massive Everton fan, and one of my best friends is a massive Everton fan. They were playing a random game at home. It was like a weeknight. And it was randomly on the news that Sylvester Stallone's going to come out at halftime with like the director, and they're going to record fans in their seats to have essentially placements of the camera, and they want the crowd noise to be able to put into the film. And Everton were losing at halftime, so most of the fans weren't there for halftime. And like anyone that watches football, they tend to go away during halftime to get drinks and food and stuff. So Son walks out to an empty Goodison Park, essentially. And I was like, this didn't really go to plan, did it? Because in American sports, they might be like that. But the green screen's so distracting. It's because you can tell they're in a studio with extras at the front, and then you get the background. You know how we speak about The Mandalorian, where it's like you don't get the sense of depth. You can't tell what's real and what's not anymore.
The lighting doesn't match at all.
Yeah, it's so dark, and whether that's because the Goodison Park was empty because it backfired their plan and everything else. It's really funny to me just because of that behind the scenes stuff I know about that match and not everything that went along to it. I respect that they switched it all up for this actor, because it would look too corporate if it was Liverpool, because everyone in the world could recognise the Liverpool badge. But having Everton, there'll be Americans that have never heard of them. Stallone now declares himself an Everton fan. Things like that. I was going to say something else, but there's loads of photos, guys. If you watch, go on Google him, just type in Goodison Park Rocky, and there's loads of photos behind the scenes. I've completely lost my train of thought. I had a really good point.
Daniel says Creed 2 has worse green screen. It looks like a video game. I can't even remember the green screen in that film, so I'm sure that's going to be a rude awakening for me when I get to that next week. Yeah, and it I can understand why they had to do it. Like, obviously, there's a reason there for doing it, but when you go back to like the good old days of like Rocky 1 and everything's just in camera, you can really tell the difference. And watching it again today, it was like night and day. It stuck out like a sore thumb. It was like almost those, if I'm off the top of my head, like worst CGI scenes of compositing. You remember like the dinosaur stampede from Peter Jackson's King Kong film?
Yeah.
How you can tell they're not in that environment. It just looks like that. There's only a few brief shots here and there, but it did kind of take me out of the fight a little bit. We just have some people here sort of like speculating what they want Creed 3 to be. I guess we'll probably bring up those comments or talk about those comments next time, because that's definitely going to be, well, where can the franchise go after this? But I guess if I'm going to give my final thoughts on this, I think it's, as I mentioned, it's my favorite soft reboot of the franchise. I think that the director had that clear vision for what he wanted to do. I think he nailed the characters, and he set up these brand new characters, which hopefully, I mean, I kind of want them to end with Creed 3. As I mentioned earlier, I don't think this can go on from film to film to film. But interesting enough characters with relationships that you want to see develop. Not only just that, but the relationship between Adonis and Rocky is fantastic in this film. Stallone gives one of the best performances of his career in this. And yeah, it's just all around great. It honors what's come before. It sets up new stuff. And as I say, I think Ryan Coogler, his absence is felt in the second one. And I think that's testament to how good he was as a director for this, certain choices that he made in terms of his camera. It's just brilliant. It's emotional. It's exciting. It's everything you want from a Rocky film. And it is continuing that back to basics approach. Even when we get into Creed 2, where it could have very easily gone into that more cartoony territory, I think that still manages to rein it back in as well, and you have that consistent tone throughout. They're just talking about where they want the films to go. I'm just having a look at this. I kind of want to bring up some of these comments because they're really good, but I don't know if we should talk about that kind of stuff at the end of Creed 2. What do you reckon?
We'll save it for next week, guys. But we are reading them, and we'll probably just because it feels a bit early because we've got.
I think it's about like the whole Rocky dying conversation.
Yeah, I mean,
comments
as a final point, I thought it would have happened in this. I think everyone thought they're going in, and then when they drop it in Creed 2 as an insights next week, it felt a bit weird. And Creed 3, we don't know if Rocky's going to be in it, if he's going to have his own film. They even tie up his own story arc again in Creed 2. So I don't know what's going to happen, but it sounds so horrible. It reminds me of these like Marvel films where like if you don't see it, it's not happened. Considering Rocky's like gone into retirement in like 4 films in a row. Like, this is my last fight, this is my last fight. And it's kind of that like, this sounds disgusting. Like, cement it, like ruinous. You know, it'll be one of the saddest scenes in probably cinematic history. It'll be right up there, and do it, because the problem is if it's not done, they might crop up in another 5 years.
Yeah,
it sounds like a really horrible way.
I think Stallone, after Creed 2, I think he said that he retired the character, and I love the ending with his character in that. You know, like the end scene's beautiful to Creed 2. We'll talk about that next week, but it wasn't enough. And I think because you established the whole, oh God, it sounds so horrible. Because you established the cancer plot line in this, I feel like it needs some kind of payoff. I think Rocky's one of those characters, and you talked about like you don't see it didn't happen, but we have seen major characters from this franchise die off screen. We don't see Adrian die. We don't see Paulie die. But I feel like we need to see Rocky die. And that's so horrible. And I don't want to see that because it's going to break me. But I feel just to cap the franchise off, and it's done. We've seen him rise. We've seen his entire career. We've seen the winter of his life, and then sadly the passing. And I don't think Creed should go on for any more films after that point. And I guess it would kind of mirror the Rocky films in that Rocky's mentor dies in the 3rd film in some way. And I think that would just be a beautiful send-off for the character. And it's kind of like, well, Marvel's probably not a good example because we have seen Iron Man die, but chances are we're probably going to get a Disney Plus series later down the line where we're going to bring him back because no characters can stay dead, apparently. But where you have that opportunity to send that character off. And I love that what they did with Iron Man at the end of Endgame. I would like something in a similar vein to Rocky in that way. It's going to be really hard to watch. I ain't going to say it isn't, but I think it's right for the character as well. Just this entire legacy in cinema history, just to have a definitive end to that character, you know.
It's when it's a legacy character and they've been around, they've had such the screen presence for so long. It worked for Adrian and Paulie, but in the Rocky series, I think it would do it a disservice. Now, they want to use it to push forward a plot dynamic. They can. It would be interesting to see the effect of that on not just Michael B. Jordan, but the audience at home, the world they live in with Rocky as well. There's a really big factor behind it. Also, if they're going to do it, I feel like it should be on screen, and I feel like it shouldn't be at some big climactic moment in a 3rd Creed film. It should be, this sounds horrid, like a 3rd of the way in, like opening act, something happen. You know, like in terrible example of Marvel, like when Peggy Carter passes away, it's like Cap dashing back to the bed. It's that kind of, we've had this legacy character. Granted, it's very different Rocky compared to Hey That Well. But it is that this is an important moment for a character arc, and then it's not really something you can play with. So if they're going to do the decision, I feel like we're going to get it in Creed 3. Whatever decision that is, it's going to be tough. It's going to be really hard to watch. And you mentioned Iron Man. It's that legacy effect. It's the 10 years, 10 films, whatever it wants to be. But this will be his 9th Rocky appearance, which is probably up there in terms of records of actors to play the character the most. It's up there. It'll be up there with, like, I think Iron Man, C-3PO. Yeah, exactly. God, that's throwing me. But yeah, I don't know if I've got anything else to say on that bit. What I will say is my overall thoughts.
Oh God, so yeah, overall thoughts.
I'll just go wrap up my overall thoughts on Creed. Is as a return to the Rocky world, the Rocky universe. It is far better than it has any right to be or deserve to be. I'm not going to say this franchise doesn't deserve a great film like this, but as the skepticality of the idea to get this film is not something that I think the world was ready for, and that's all credit to Ryan Coogler, for Sylvester Stallone for putting that idea out there, for letting it be presented on screen, because it is a phenomenal drama. I think anyone can watch this of any age. I don't think you need to have seen 6 Rocky films, 1 Rocky film. Could even see Creed 2. This is going to bring you back to basics. It's a drama, it's a story, and it hits on a personal level. So I think you got investment both in and off screen for what this film does. And overall, I'd say this is in the top 3 Rocky films with a new directing edge. Granted, a slightly weaker villain, but overall, it's fantastic. It's right up there. And you know, this couldn't be called Rocky. This could be a film about any boxer, ultimately, and Stallone could play any other boxer in history, this would still stand on its own without the Rocky legacy.
Absolutely, and we're not going to throw you guys for a loop. We may as well announce what we're doing next week. We're doing Creed 2, surprise, surprise. So we will be ending the Rocky films into the Creed films as well, and finishing those off. We will be talking more about the future of the franchise, where we want to see it go, what the rumored continuation is for the franchise at the moment, and whether we agree with that and whether that should be the direction that it's going. We do have two really quick questions, and I promise we'll talk about this one more next week because I think this one's more centered on Creed 2. Daniel asks, question for Creed 2, would it be interesting with a Drago spin-off? We'll talk about this more in depth next week. The short answer for me is no. I think the Drago storyline was tied off with that film. There's nowhere else that can go. And we get everything we need from his character in that. And the main one is also you guys are going to make a Rocky movies ranking by the end. Would be interesting to know everyone's Rocky ranking. Absolutely. But we'll do that at the end of Creed 2. I think we have to. I'm actually going to have to think long and hard about that list, to be honest, because we talked about it. Even the ones that aren't, do we do objectively the best or our favorites? It's a completely different list. But yeah, Daniel, we will have a ranking list by the end of that video. Let me just have a look if we got any other ones. I think that's it. So yeah, we'll round off. So this has been a great discussion. Thank you to everyone that has been commenting along, sharing your thoughts on this, not just on this film, but the entire Rocky franchise as well. Please continue to do that. Like, share, comment, subscribe, all of that good stuff. And tomorrow we have more retro reviews. Sort of sandwiched in between the final two Creed films that we're talking about. We do have our Tron review coming tomorrow. That is pre-recorded, but one of us will be in the comments taking your guys' comments as we go through. And for the 10th anniversary of the film, we'll have our Tron Legacy review out on Thursday as well. Trying to get my head around all the times that we recorded these and when they're coming out. December's a packed month, as we keep saying, and believe us, when we get towards the end of the month, we're going to have even more stuff for you guys as well. So if you want to find out more of that content, what we've got coming out, when it's scheduled and when you can expect it, best way to do that is to follow us on our social media. So that's at Facebook, just type in Cinema Savvy, Twitter at cinema_savvy. And if you'd like to pick up any of our merch, you can find the TeePublic link in the description down below. We have a couple of designs on there, so please feel free to check that out. This has been great. We have other videos, as I mentioned, the Tron's coming out this week. We also have Mandalorian on Friday. And yeah, that's everything. So if you are just joining us for the Creed reviews, check out next Tuesday, 10 p.m. again, GMT, and we'll see you guys there. Thanks for watching.